For decades, the world had been told where India belonged in the hierarchy, a backseat driver in the race for global dominance, a supporting actor in someone else's story. But India was never meant to be in the background. Quietly, patiently, it studied the board. It learned every piece, every player, every weakness. And when the time was right, it didn't just play the game, it flipped the entire board over. They never saw it coming. The world's so-called powerhouses thought they had the map of the future in their hands. Every move predicted, every nation's role already decided. But then, India stepped onto the stage and rewrote the script. This wasn't just a decision, it was a masterstroke. A move so bold, so calculated, and so fearless that it didn't just challenge the old order, it shattered it. This was not luck. This was not chance. This was the result of vision, discipline, and the refusal to be underestimated. America was shocked. The world was stunned. The move wasn't just about politics, trade, or economics. It was about sending a message. We will not be told who we are. We will decide who we are. India understood something most powerful nations forget. Strength is not just about how loud you roar, but about how deeply your roots grow. It built alliances where no one expected. It turned weaknesses into weapons. It took challenges and forged them into opportunities. And when the world doubted, it smiled and worked harder. This is the moment every nation dreams of, the day you stop reacting and start leading, the day you stop waiting for permission and start setting the terms. And make no mistake, leadership is never given, it is taken. India didn't just join the table, it made the table bigger and put itself at the head of it. And here's the truth, the rest of the world will now have to play by a new set of rules. They'll try to negotiate, they'll try to intimidate, some will try to copy, but the advantage belongs to the one who dared first, to the one who moved when others hesitated. That's what changes history, not talk, not hope, but action. Relentless, decisive, fearless action. This is not just a story about a nation. This is a lesson for every person listening. Your circumstances do not define you. Your history does not limit you. You are not trapped by the expectations others place on you. You are stronger than the labels they try to stick on your back. And when you decide to rise, when you commit to outworking, outthinking, and outlasting everyone, you will shock the world too. India's move was a reminder. Empires fall, powers fade, but courage and strategy endure. So take this moment as proof. They can underestimate you, they can doubt you, they can dismiss you, but when you are prepared, when you are disciplined, when you strike with precision, there is nothing they can do to stop you. The world may not be ready for your next move. Good. That's how you win. That's how you change everything. That's how you make them remember your name. They never saw it coming. One decisive move, executed with patience and precision, changed everything overnight. The world's top strategists had maps and models and forecasts, but strategy is not a math problem. It is a test of nerve, timing, and the willingness to act. India watched closely, learned the field, and then struck with a plan so calculated it looked effortless. That shock was not born from arrogance or chance. It was born from relentless discipline and preparation. This moment was not accidental. It was the result of steady investment in industry, education, and strategic relationships. India understood that power is assembled long before it is displayed. So when the moment arrived, Indian leaders did not scramble. They moved with clarity. Economic levers were coordinated with diplomatic outreach and technological initiatives, all aligned toward a single objective. When the full pattern appeared, observers called it a surprise, but it was the product of years of quiet, deliberate work. Economic resilience was the sharp edge of the maneuver. India reinforced domestic manufacturing, secured local supply chains, and created alternatives to systems once dominated by older powers. When external pressure came in the form of tariffs or threats, India reduced its dependencies and amplified its capacities. Coercion lost its bite. The capacity to produce, to innovate, and to export turned leverage into opportunity. That is the point where fear erodes and respect replaces it. Diplomacy moved like chess, subtle and relentless. India did not shout its intentions. It cultivated partnerships across regions, deepened energy ties, and welcomed trade with new allies. Each agreement, each investment, each quiet summit call was a step toward a larger design. When the decisive action unfolded, the world perceived it as audacious because it missed the long sequence of moves that made it inevitable. Technology and talent multiplied the effect. India's engineers and entrepreneurs had built capabilities that began to influence global platforms and standards. Leadership in critical technologies created choice. Who sets the rules, who supplies the tools, and who defines the standards? That form of influence cannot be countered by tariffs alone. It reshapes markets, expectations, and alliances. But the most powerful element was mindset. A nation that believes in its right to define its path will act with boldness others lack. India's leadership embraced a long-term vision over short-term appeasement. That clarity mobilized citizens, investors, and partners. When a population trusts its direction, it generates the resilience required to outlast pressure. Internal unity turns external attacks into a catalyst for growth rather than a cause for retreat. When the world finally saw India's move, many called it a masterstroke. America was surprised, allies were recalculating, and markets adjusted overnight. The true lesson is not in the tactic, but in the preparation. Power that surprises is rarely spontaneous. It is the end game of steady, deliberate work. The move outplayed opponents because it combined economic depth, diplomatic subtlety, technological muscle, and an unshakable national confidence. History remembers the bold, but it rewards the prepared. India's decisive action was not about ego. It was about proving that a nation can rise through strategy, stamina, and steady skill. That is what left the world stunned, not the shock of a single act, but the visible weight of years of relentless, focused building. The lesson for leaders is clear: prepare, persist, and seize the moment. When a nation builds capacity quietly, it can change the rules visibly. That lesson powerfully echoes for individuals too. Mastery precedes triumph. Prepare in silence, then act loudly. That is how you outplay the world, and let history remember this. The reaction across the globe was instant. Screens lit up, markets jolted, and leaders scrambled to interpret what had just happened. It wasn't only the move itself that caused the shock. It was the sudden realization that they had underestimated India's capacity to think ahead and execute with precision. For too long, the dominant powers assumed that India would follow predictable paths, stay within old frameworks, and react instead of act. But this time, India set the tempo, and everyone else had to adjust. The shock was rooted in misjudgment. Many believed they understood India's position, its economic dependencies, its trade alignments, its political hesitations. Analysts drew straight lines from past behavior to future expectations. But the straight line is the laziest assumption in strategy. India had been quietly bending that line, shaping a new trajectory beneath the radar. By the time the new path became visible, it was already too late for opponents to counter it effectively. That's the genius of surprise. It forces. Economic resilience and rapid innovation became the twin engines that allowed India to absorb shocks and turn pressure into momentum. When external forces tried to squeeze supply chains, raise tariffs, or intimidate through trade measures, India didn't flinch. It had already been rebuilding the muscle needed to stand on its own. That rebuilding wasn't theatrical, it was methodical. Factories were upgraded, ports were modernized, and logistics corridors were strengthened. Policies like Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat pushed investment into manufacturing, not as a slogan, but as a practical program to create capacity. The result: when access to certain markets or components tightened, India could reroute production, substitute inputs, and keep the wheels turning rather than bending under pressure. On the innovation front, India moved faster than critics expected. Instead of waiting for permission to participate in global technological leadership, Indian entrepreneurs and engineers built platforms that solved local problems at massive scale and then exported those solutions. Digital public goods like Aadhaar, UPI, and the GST backbone are not just domestic conveniences. They are infrastructure-level innovations that transformed how 1 billion people transact, verify, and interact. That kind of scale gives India bargaining power. When your market can process payments for hundreds of millions with low friction, foreign firms and foreign powers suddenly have to factor that capability into their strategies. Pharmaceuticals and biotech are another clear example. India's generics industry, built over decades, became the world's pharmacy during crises. The capacity to manufacture vaccines at scale, not overnight, but through long-term investments in facilities, regulatory competence, and skilled labor, turned pressure into soft power. When demand spikes, dependence on a single supplier becomes a vulnerability. India turned into an alternative supplier of life-saving products, and that altered the calculus of influence. Nations that once expected deference had to recognize India's utility, not merely its size. The startup ecosystem amplified this shift. A wave of founders built companies that were lean, frugal, and hyper-productive. They learned to do more with less, engineering solutions that were cost-effective and contextually smart. Venture capital flowed not because of hype alone, but because these firms delivered metrics: users, retention, revenue. When innovation is coupled with market reach, it becomes durable power. Tech hubs in Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and beyond became not just talent pools, but centers of decisive influence. Global platforms now routinely hire Indian product leaders, and that influence ripples into decisions about product roadmaps and market strategies. Energy strategy and supply diversification matter too. India accelerated renewables, green hydrogen research, and strategic energy ties with multiple partners. By reducing single-source dependence and investing in domestic energy capacity, India lowered the leverage others once held. Energy independence is strategic independence. The less you worry about sudden cutoffs, the more freedom you have to make choices that serve long-term national interest. Talent is the constant beneath every metric. India's universities, engineering colleges, and online upskilling programs produce tens of thousands of capable engineers, scientists, and managers each year. That human capital is a multiplier. When you have problem solvers in volume, you can scale manufacturing, R&D, and services simultaneously. That's why Indian firms could pivot quickly, automate where necessary, and keep innovation cycles tight. Where external pressure aimed to fracture capabilities, the sheer depth of talent absorbed shocks and converted them into new opportunities. Financial frameworks were modernized to support this transformation. Policy reforms, tax incentives, and easier capital flows made it simpler to fund large projects and fast-moving startups alike. Public-private partnerships accelerated infrastructure projects, while special economic zones and production-linked incentives focused resources where they mattered most. That coordination between government, industry, and capital created a resilience architecture able to withstand external economic coercion. All these moves built a shield, but they also built a blade. Resilience lowered vulnerability. Innovation created leverage. When India acted, it did so from a position of strength. Diversified suppliers, scalable manufacturing, homegrown technology platforms, and a vast talent base. External players who once assumed leverage found those levers had been removed or bluntly neutralized. The result was a strategic reversal. Pressure intended to shape India instead pushed India to accelerate its own project of economic sovereignty and technological leadership. Strategic diplomacy became the quiet force multiplier behind India's ability to outmaneuver global expectations and tilt the balance in its favor. While much of the world still played by the old rules of bloc politics, aligning firmly with one side and alienating the other, India wrote its own script. It did not bend fully to Washington, nor did it bow to Moscow or Beijing. Instead, it created an agile network of relationships, each tailored to extract mutual benefit without surrendering autonomy. This approach confused traditional power centers because they were used to loyalty being a binary choice. India refused that frame, building what could be called multi-vector diplomacy, engaging simultaneously with competing powers and turning each relationship into a pillar of national interest. In forums like the G20, BRICS, SCO, and the Quad, India didn't just show up, it took the microphone and set agendas. Hosting the G20 in a time of geopolitical strain wasn't a ceremonial act, it was a declaration of relevance. When conflicts erupted elsewhere, India positioned itself not as a distant observer, but as an indispensable mediator. This gave New Delhi both visibility and leverage, allowing it to speak in terms of global stability while making sure that the terms also protected its own economic and security interests. Trade agreements were reimagined as strategic tools rather than simple market access deals. India entered free trade agreements where technology transfer, investment in manufacturing, and skill development were part of the package. At the same time, it wasn't afraid to walk away from negotiations, like the RCP, if they didn't align with its vision for domestic industry and long-term competitiveness. This selective participation reinforced the message: India would not accept a seat at the table if the menu was designed by someone else. By controlling the terms of engagement, it controlled the degree of dependence. Defense partnerships expanded not just in volume but in variety. India continued to buy advanced systems from traditional partners like Russia while deepening joint exercises and technology co-development with the United States, France, and Israel. It invested in indigenous weapons programs under the Make in India framework, ensuring that even as it imported capabilities, it built its own production base. This dual strategy meant that no single supplier could turn off the tap and cripple India's security. It also meant that India's military ecosystem was absorbing technology and expertise from multiple sources, accelerating domestic proficiency. Energy diplomacy was equally deliberate. By securing oil at discounted rates from Russia while simultaneously expanding renewable energy collaborations with the EU and Japan, India balanced immediate needs with long-term sustainability goals. This prevented any one partner from holding disproportionate sway over its energy security. It also allowed India to meet climate commitments without compromising. Economic resilience became the bedrock upon which India built its ability to surprise, withstand pressure, and ultimately outplay global powers. At the core of this resilience was a long-term vision that went beyond short-term political victories and instead focused on creating a self-sustaining economic engine. India understood that without strong economic foundations, any diplomatic maneuver or strategic stance would be temporary at best. This is why the country poured its energy into boosting domestic manufacturing, strengthening infrastructure, expanding digital capabilities, and empowering its labor force to compete at a global scale. Initiatives like Make in India and production-linked incentives were not slogans. They were targeted interventions to ensure that India could produce high-value goods, reduce import dependence, and become a critical node in global supply chains. The digital economy became one of India's most powerful strategic weapons. Through platforms like UPI, Aadhaar, and other homegrown innovations, India not only modernized its own economy, but also set standards that other nations began to study and in some cases adopt. This digital backbone enabled faster, more transparent governance, expanded financial inclusion, and made Indian markets more accessible to both domestic entrepreneurs and global investors. More importantly, it reduced friction in trade, finance, and administration, creating an economy that could adapt quickly to shocks, whether they came in the form of a pandemic, geopolitical crisis, or sudden market shift. Agricultural reforms and investments in food security also played a key role in economic resilience. By increasing agricultural exports and improving supply chains, India positioned itself as not just a self-sufficient nation, but as a food supplier to others. In a world where supply chain disruptions can destabilize entire regions, this gave India both bargaining power and goodwill. Countries facing shortages look to India as a dependable partner, strengthening its role in global trade and diplomacy. Energy independence strategies were woven into economic planning, ensuring that growth was not at the mercy of volatile oil prices or politically influenced supply chains. By expanding renewable energy projects, investing in nuclear power, and diversifying import sources, India insulated itself from some of the vulnerabilities that often cripple emerging economies. This energy strategy not only supported domestic industry, but also gave India a unique voice in global climate discussions, allowing it to argue for realistic transitions that balance growth with sustainability. Foreign direct investment was carefully cultivated, with India offering investors both a massive consumer market and a reform-oriented business environment. Tax reforms, simplification of regulations, and the creation of specialized industrial zones attracted tech giants, manufacturers, and startups alike. This inflow of capital didn't just create jobs, it brought in technology, management expertise, and integration into global production networks. By ensuring that investments aligned with national priorities, India avoided the trap of becoming a mere low-cost labor hub and instead moved toward being an innovation and manufacturing powerhouse. Most importantly, India's economic resilience was as much about mindset as it was about policy. It was the belief that dependence is weakness and self-reliance is strength. This belief shaped every decision, from building world-class infrastructure to training millions in future-ready skills. It was the quiet force that allowed India to negotiate with the confidence of a nation that could stand on its own feet, weather storms, and emerge stronger each time. And when the world realized this, it was too late for them to play the old games. India had already rewritten the rules. Global perception and influence are often underestimated as strategic tools, but for India, they became a decisive factor in outmaneuvering some of the most powerful nations on earth. Perception is not just about how a country is seen in the media. It is about shaping narratives, controlling the flow of information, and projecting an image that aligns with national goals. India understood that in today's interconnected world, wars are not only fought on battlefields or in boardrooms, they are fought in the minds of people on screens and through stories. This is why India invested heavily in cultural diplomacy, global branding, and strategic communication, ensuring that its rise was not perceived as a threat, but as an opportunity for partnership and mutual growth. The nation leveraged its rich cultural heritage, from Bollywood and yoga to cuisine and festivals, as a soft power asset that resonated across continents. These cultural exports were not just entertainment or tradition. They became powerful connectors, creating familiarity and goodwill toward India, a country that can make others dance to its music, speak its language, and celebrate its traditions already has a foothold in their hearts and minds. This cultural connection laid the groundwork for deeper political and economic ties, often smoothing over conflicts and building trust where hard diplomacy might have failed. In parallel, India amplified its voice on global platforms such as the United Nations, G20, and BRICS, not as a passive participant, but as an agenda setter. By taking firm stances on climate change, equitable trade, and global health, India positioned itself as a responsible, principled leader, a nation that not only sought its own growth, but also advocated for the interests of the global South. This image contrasted sharply with the self-serving reputation of some other powers, making India a preferred partner for developing nations seeking fairness in the international order. Media and technology became key battlegrounds for influence. Indian leaders and diplomats learned to speak directly to global audiences through social media, bypassing traditional gatekeepers and presenting their vision unfiltered. Viral speeches, impactful visuals, and carefully crafted campaigns showcased India's achievements, rebutted criticism, and rallied both domestic and international support. The digital space became a theater where perception was shaped in real time, allowing India to counter misinformation and present its version of events before rival narratives could dominate. Strategically, India also engaged in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief efforts that transcended politics, from sending vaccines and medicines during the COVID-19 crisis to providing food aid to nations in distress. India demonstrated that it could act with compassion and responsibility on a global scale. These acts were not only moral victories, but also diplomatic masterstrokes. Every nation that received help became a potential ally in the future. Economic partnerships were framed not as exploitation, but as mutually beneficial collaborations. India made sure that countries working with it felt empowered, respected, and included in the benefits of growth. This cooperative approach strengthened alliances, reduced the risk of isolation, and fostered a sense of shared destiny with its partners. By controlling perception, India ensured that even bold or disruptive moves on the geopolitical stage were viewed through a lens of strategic necessity rather than aggression. The ability to project strength while maintaining a reputation for fairness and reliability allowed India to expand its influence without provoking united opposition. In a world where image can dictate policy, India mastered the art of looking like the solution, not the problem. And that, more than anything else, is why the world had to respect its rise. India's recent moves have proven that in today's world, power is not defined solely by military might or economic size. It is equally shaped by perception, trust, and influence. By mastering soft power, controlling narratives, and building genuine partnerships, India transformed challenges into opportunities and outplayed some of the most dominant players on the global stage. This is not just a story of political strategy. It is a lesson in how vision, culture, and diplomacy can shift the balance of power without a single shot being fired. The message is clear. In the 21st century, the nation that wins hearts and minds will ultimately win the game.